A game changer in Syria, and events on the ground are developing rapidly. A bomb blast at the National Security Headquarters in Damascus has killed 3, possibly more, members of President Bashar al-Assad's inner circle. The regime says the following ministers died in that attack: the Defence Minister, General Daoud Rajha, a former Chief of Staff and one of the few Christians to hold power in Syria. Also, Russia's deputy, Asif Shawkat, he was also President al-Assad's brother-in-law and one of his top and most trusted military chiefs. Also, Assistant Vice President and former Defence Minister, General Hassan Tokhmani, he too lost his life in that attack as well. While some more are injured, and according to some people already dead, Interior Minister Mohammed al-Shah, General Hisham Ikhtiyar, the head of national security, and Hafez Makhlouf, head of the investigations at the Syrian intelligence agency. The fate of those 3, though, has not yet been confirmed. Well, there have been no images of this blast. Syrian rebels are claiming responsibility, but they deny this was a suicide bomb attack. That's what the government is claiming. So a strike, it seems, right at the very heart of power in Syria. But could this really be the death knell for the regime of al-Assad? Well, joining me to discuss tonight, Mahmoud Jabash. He's a Syrian activist who's based here in Paris. In the studio with me as well, Luis Peral. He's a research fellow at the EUISS. Thanks for being with us. In Washington, D.C., Radwan Ziadeh is a member of the opposition Syrian National Council. He's in charge of foreign affairs at that organisation. And in the UK, Jonathan Paris is a Middle East analyst at the Atlantic Council of the United States. Many thanks indeed to you all for being with us. I'd like to start with you, Radwan Ziadeh. There is some confusion surrounding this attack, surrounding exactly what happens. The state claims it was a bodyguard who blew himself up. Rebels saying that's not true. What information do you have?
The information that we have that there is no suicide bombers. It's mainly it was a small pump. Put it on under one of the tables during the meetings and then being explode. We don't have confirmed of the killing of the death of Muhammad Sha'ar and Hisham Ikhtiyar, but we can confirm, of course, and the state TV confirmed the killings of Daoud Rajha, the Minister of Defense, Asif Shawkat, the brothers-in-law of Bashar al-Assad, and of course the killings of the others. It's clear that these operations cannot be done without the intelligence inside the regime who gave the information to the rebels, to the activists, and to the Free Syrian Army. That sense that the Assad regime can no more control the Damascus as he's claimed every day and every night. And I think that those top advisors and those top leaders, Asif Shawkat as example, who is the guy who take the decisions and monitor the situation on the ground and take the military and the security decision day by day, the killings of Asif Shawkat will be a huge blow within the regime, and I think that will be consequences. What expect the next, that will be 2 scenarios. The first scenario, this is the most likely, and unfortunately we see some signs of it, that the Assad regime will take rehabilitation and taking revenge against the population of Damascus. Now we can confirm using the Air Force in 5 different neighborhoods in Damascus, in Al-Hajar al-Aswad, in Daraya, in Al-Maidan, in Zahira, and other places. That, of course, will leave hundreds of deaths among the civilians. And this is also the Assad scenario, maybe for the Assad himself now to think again that the number of days of Bashar al-Assad is not counting, and he has to think again what the scenario he would like to have.
All right, Radwan Ziadeh, many thanks indeed. Luis Peral, at least 3, it seems, possibly more, key members of the regime wiped out in one attack today. This is a severe blow to the regime of al-Assad, but could it be a mortal blow?
This is, in my view, a turning point which represents the end of the regime at some point. Either the regime collapses from within or it will be defeated by the Free Syrian Army, I believe, because the weakness of the regime is that it has been killing people for 18 months, so it cannot win this conflict.
The military power of the Syrian army far outstrips that of the rebels, that is for sure. As we just heard, there are concerns about how the Assad regime will retaliate in Damascus and elsewhere. Is that something you're worried about?
Allow me first to pay tribute to the Syrian people's martyrs and the revolutionaries who continue to struggle in difficult conditions. Without going into details, we have to wait to know the details of how this operation was executed. But it surely is a great coup for the regime. I think that it will be a driver for the revolution to continue, because now in difficult conditions the revolution continue about 16 months.
Almost 17 months.
Yeah, we begin the 17th month. And now I think that people still waiting will be encouraged to leave this boat which is sinking. I think that there is no hope from the Assad himself to understand that it's enough. The Syrian people have suffered enough and it's time for him to leave. Mm-hmm. But maybe I think some people of goodwill which are still waiting or which can do something in the circles of the power would move to put an end to this suffering of the people. I am afraid that the regime itself will take pretext of this operation to escalate the repression in many other cities, especially of the Russian continue to support him in the Security Council, and if Western countries, and especially the United States, continue to hesitate, right? Because I think that it's time for action.
And
now.
On the diplomatic front, it's interesting you brought that up. There was due to be a vote at the UN Security Council tonight. That has been postponed now until tomorrow on the wishes of International Envoy Kofi Annan, it seems. That vote not now taking place tonight. We're also hearing the United States and Russia, of course, very much opposed on what to do about Syria. President Obama, President Putin have been engaged in a telephone call. We don't know what has come out of that, but we will keep an eye on it for sure. Luis Peral, if I could come back to you. We were just talking about this being encouraging for the rebels now, that very bloody revolution now in its 17th month. What is also encouraging is the number of defections. We've seen generals leave, we've seen thousands of soldiers, we've seen a high-ranking diplomat in the Syrian ambassador to Baghdad. He also defected from the regime. Is this what is going to bring down the regime rather than firepower and attacks on the ground?
This is indeed an important signal that the regime is starting to collapse from within, that there is fragmentation within the core of the regime, and the inner circle is being touched already. I think it's important to remember that one of these defections, the one of the general class, is really crucial in the sense that he was a representative of the Sunni family, very important to keep the power in Syria for the Alawite regime. So some of these defections are very important. And I think that there are signals in this sense. But I think only this morning, the chief of Israeli military intelligence said that the regime could collapse in between 2 months and 2 years. So it's a bit too early to say when it will happen.
Too early to say. All right, I think we can bring in Jonathan Paris at the Atlantic Council. He joins us from the UK on the line. Jonathan, is this a turning point for you, this attack today?
I believe that today is the day we will remember, the day that the tide turned. The tide is turning, I would say, in the sense that while we cannot say that the regime is going to collapse tomorrow, we can say that something significant happened today, and everybody feels it. Everybody internationally and everybody inside Syria, I believe, feels that something has changed today.
And what about concerns about retaliation, about the regime's next move? I mean, we've had talk this week about chemical weapons. We're seeing an increasingly desperate, paranoid regime. Several close members of that regime wiped out in one attack, it appears. What could be Assad's next move?
Well, I'm not sure he has any good moves. You see, what's happened today, and I think the other speakers have alluded to this, is that there's been a psychological blow to the regime and to Assad with the death of his brother-in-law, who, by the way, was previously poisoned, the death of the two other close associates of the regime. There's been a psychological blow. It's sort of like the Tet Offensive in Vietnam in 1968. Even though technically the regime may hold on and keep Damascus for another day or another week or another month, as in the Vietnam analogy in Tet, everybody knew that after that day that something had happened, that the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese were going to win that war. And I think most people, even the Russians, our friends, the Russians, might conclude today that Assad is finished.
I think we can now go to Borzu Daragahi. He's a correspondent and he's in Beirut. He's been covering what's been going on in Damascus very closely. Borzu, as I've been saying, a lot of concern about what's been happening in Damascus since that attack this morning. What can you tell us about the situation inside the city now? This, of course, was a safe haven for people from all around the country up until 2 or 3 days ago. That appears to have changed very much.
Well, I think that certain sections of Damascus have long been embroiled in this conflict from the very beginning, and those areas have become strongholds of the Free Syrian Army in recent months. This includes Qabun, Duma, certain cities on the certain towns on the outskirts of Damascus, and the Maidan neighborhood. And you know, in fact, from what we're hearing, there are still sort of pockets of normalcy inside Damascus. But even in those pockets, people are, even if they haven't heard gunfire themselves, they're seeing what's happening on television, they're shuttering their stores, and they're heading inside for fear of what comes next.
And there's a lot of conflicting information coming out about the attack itself, Borzu. The state claiming it was a suicide bomb attack by a bodyguard. The rebels, and we've also heard from the Syrian National Council saying that wasn't the case. It was actually a bomb that was planted inside security headquarters. What is confusing, though, is that we've seen no images of this attack. And we've also heard reports of no damage to surrounding buildings. Any idea why that might be?
It's really hard to tell. No one is able to get any kind of optics on this site. But, you know, we should take all claims with a little bit of suspicion. I think the rebels have an interest in sort of depicting this as some kind of elaborate inside job, even if it was, for example, one lone bodyguard who blew himself up. You know, this is an effort to sow confusion and mistrust within the top ranks of the government. So why not, you know, even if it was one bodyguard, say that it was a carefully planned operation with the help of insiders. It helps their cause. So we got to be careful about the claims of people during wartime.
There are a lot of claims and counterclaims. But, Borzu, you've been covering this conflict for many months now. If I could put it to you as well, the same question I put to Jonathan Paris. Is this a turning point? Is this what's often been said, the beginning of the end for this regime?
Well, I was just talking, actually, coincidentally, with a group of about a dozen Syrian activists here in Lebanon. And one of the things that they were saying is that, you know, thought that this is going to go on for 6 months, this conflict, before the regime falls. Now their estimates have changed, and they're thinking, maybe optimistically, that it could happen, it could end within 1 month or 2 months.
All right. Radwan Ziadeh, if I could go back to you, a member of the Syrian National Council, the main opposition against the regime of President al-Assad. Now, the state, as I say, is claiming that this was a suicide bomb attack, something that the FSA and yourselves deny. But is there a risk that this revolution is being hijacked by terrorists, that elements related to al-Qaeda are infiltrating Syria and are ready to gain a foothold in this vacuum of power?
We have these claims before in Libya, where actually the head of the Revolutionary Council in Tripoli was being accused, affiliated with al-Qaeda, and being detained in UK before. But again, we have an election in Libya, and resulted with winning of the liberals. and where and they are far away after the before the Islamists. I think this claim's always been repeated in the media, but it's far away from the reality on the ground. I have been in the Syrian refugee camps and in different areas where actually the rebels and the activists, they are living there. They cross the border to do some operations and back to Jordan and Lebanon or Turkey. All of them, they are ordinary Syrians, but their relatives, brothers or mothers or sisters has been killed by the security or tortured to death. And this is why it's a natural consequences of the systematic and widespread killings of the Assad regime. Don't forget the Termisa massacre, and before in Al-Hawla, Al-Qubair, and other areas. The Syrian people, they will remember day by day. That's committed by the Assad regime and his Shabiha and his militias. And I think that it doesn't matter if we have a bodyguard making suicide or we have a bomb. Anyway, we have an insider within the regime. Because even there is no apartment or a house in Syria. Maybe has brother or has a sister has been detained, has been killed, and this is why it's so obvious that the Assad regime lost the confidence within the Syrian people, and the Syrian people, they will fight. But what's more important, I think, for your audience, that the Syrian people lost the faith with the international community. Now the Syrian people no more watching and following up what's going on in New York with the Security Council, because they lost their faith and confidence with the international community. It has been 17 months.
Who do you blame for that? Who do you blame for that? Do you blame the Russians? Do you blame the Americans? Who's at fault?
I think the blame on the Russians and the Americans. The Russians, because the Americans and the Europeans, they are hiding behind the veto of the Russians. We said before many times, I think, that the international community has to do actions beyond the Security Council. If the Security Council failed to protect the civilians, I think the morality to save children, to save civilians, is above the legal authority that the Security Council gave.
We're going to have to take a short break. Hold that thought for me, though. We're going to come back in a few minutes with the second part of tonight's debate and, of course, the international headlines as well. Don't go away.